The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Seeds of Wellbeing series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, or funders, and any affiliated organizations involved in this project. Welcome to a Seeds of Wellbeing Voices from the Field podcast featuring voices of Hawaii agriculture producers for Hawaii agriculture producers. These podcasts are made possible by a grant from the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, also known as CTAHR, and the Seeds of Wellbeing, or SOW project, and is supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. The intention of these podcast series is to create a safe space for respectful and inclusive dialogue with people from across a broad and diverse spectrum involved in growing and making accessible the food we share together. A diversity of voices, perspectives, and experiences can serve to deepen mutual understanding, to spark creative problem solving, and provide insight into the complexities of our agricultural system. If you, or listeners, have experiences with Hawaii agriculture ecosystem, from indigenous methods, permaculture, smallholder farmers, to large, including multinational agricultural industrial companies, and everywhere in between, and you would like to share your story, please contact us. We welcome your voices and perspectives. Welcome to another Seeds of Wellbeing podcast. Today, we are honored and privileged to have a discussion with the chairperson of the Hawaii Department of Ag, Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geiser. So welcome, Phyllis, and thank you for joining us.
Aloha and good afternoon.
So I'll just start off with a little bit of, we'll just make this informal, asking you, Phyllis, to reflect on some of the results that we have found on our Seeds of Wellbeing Need Assessment. Thanks to the Hawaii Department of Ag, your support on this project, it would not be possible for us to do any of our work without Hawaii Department of Ag and USDA NIFA funding. So we are very appreciative of that. And as we're still now doing another round of assessment, but currently right now with the 345 respondents, we're finding that uncertainty, COVID, financial, pests, and productions are pretty much the top 5 of the stressors. So if I could ask you to reflect on this, what are your sentiments around what we're finding?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. You know, I wasn't surprised with those stressors that, you know, you identified through this project, because last year in 2021, we initiated our own survey, and it wasn't specifically on wellness, mental health, or stress. It was actually, we're trying to get a pulse from producers in our state, you know, that are typical of family farming operations, and you know, what were their needs to make them profitable or to expand their production. And it was kind of interesting because the top 3 bottlenecks or challenges that was addressed in our more business focused survey was supply chain issues because of the pandemic, labor shortages, and the concern over inflation and cost of transportation. So, you know, it was really in line with what you shared with us with your findings so far. And as we all know, who have had our careers in ag, whether it's in production, education, distribution, or some other ancillary type of support services, you know, it's a really high risk business. And you know, it involves not only an aptitude for understanding science applied out in the field. But there's so much uncertainty that really does contribute to volatility in marketing your product, and then dealing with Mother Nature and the elements, and of course, our 12-month year growing period, with the dealing with invasive pests, and ever-changing government compliance requirements. So yeah, so I'm glad that we have this information so far, and I think it's going to be very helpful for us to further assist our stakeholders.
Yes, thank you, Phyllis. So, we're also doing interviews, and we have done about 80 more in-depth interviews as part of what we're doing with the need assessment. And the issues keep coming up in terms of access to land, as well as housing and availability of housing on ag lands. Could you reflect on that a little bit?
Yes. Okay. So it's a very strong understanding at our level here at the department, and with the state policies, that because we are a island state, land values are very high, and acreage is very limited. So that's why our department really tries to utilize the lands that we have to assist with small farmers, beginning farmers, with our state ag park lease program. But we're limited in the number of acreage that we have to provide the most reasonable terms in terms of rent. We have over 200 farmers, producers that are on a list that we generate. So we generate a list of interest, and it's not a waiting list, but we encourage people that they're interested in getting notified by our department when leases do come up and are available. Then we'll contact you, and then we'll send you information of when we're going to do a public notice. So we know that our portfolio is limited. We are continuing to try and get more lands in our programs through Department of Land and Natural Resources. But the vast majority of the agricultural land in the state is privately owned. So yes, understand that. Housing, we hear it all the time. Housing on ag land or on farms provides security against ag theft, which is a big problem. And but also the challenges that we've heard about having housing on ag land is gentleman farming, or people developing farmland with no intentions of farming. So there's this opposing concerns. We try to encourage the counties to enforce what is already in their ordinances, to make sure that housing on farmland or ag land is for the farmer and the farmer's employees, and we support that. However, even for us, we're trying to develop 150 acres on Oahu in Kunia for a new ag park. And we've come up and with a lot of challenges on getting funding for us to put in the adequate infrastructure that we need. There is policy concern and disagreement of whether to allow a farm dwelling on ag park land. So, within the state, there's different viewpoints about whether to allow housing on our egg parks, within our portfolio. So we're continue every year to try and push forward to get adequate funding and resources to put in the water infrastructure, to subdivide, the lands. And that's really key. Just because you have land, in order for this farmer to be successful, we have to make sure that there's a ability in that location with that land to provide access to water, some kind of water, whether it's irrigation system or it's a county system, and then also utilities. So, yes, we know that, those are top priorities: land, affordable water, good quality water for food safety reasons, and then also capital. So we are always mindful of those things.
Oh, so you have brought up many issues that I would like to dive a little bit deeper for our listeners who probably
Sure.
might be curious to know. You mentioned 200 folks who are on your list. What is the decision-making process behind, like, they might wonder, how do you select who gets access then to receive the lease?
Okay. So just very generally, you contact the department, our land division, and we'll send you an application. And part of the application is you need to have residency requirements, and you need to have exhibit farm experience, whether it's education, whether it's practical professional experience, because we want to make sure that you're a bona fide farmer, and that you are compliant with your taxes. The other thing is, a big piece is you submit a business plan. So how are you going to utilize the 5 or 10 acres of land that you're vying for? And so based on those, just general aspects that I discussed, that the staff here reviews who's eligible. And you're also going to be required to submit a conservation plan too. So once you're deemed eligible, then you are notified that when you can submit your best sealed bid for the property. And then they look at the bids, and the highest bid generally gets more consideration, but I think that they also look at the quality of the business plan too. So that's just on broad terms. And if anyone needs more information, then please contact us, and we can refer you to the property managers on the respective islands to follow up.
So, like you mentioned, there's so many pieces that ag producers need to know what to do. And part of this is making sure you have all your paperwork, your finances in place. Where can they get resources to help make sure that their plan and their proposal is going to be very competitive? Because there's going to be, do they reach out to all the various other organizations that are out there? Or do they contact Hawaii State Department of Ag specifically? Because I imagine, do you have somebody that would be able to assist with that, or probably not?
We can answer the questions regarding the process and what's required. But as far as how you're going to submit your business plan, your conservation plan, then you need to work with NRCS for the conservation plan, and then I would refer you to CTAHR Cooperative Extension. Working with the college extension agents, maybe they can help you. We've also had CTAHR Go Farm graduates, or people that have graduated from UH Hilo, and so there's resources out there. if we can't answer all your questions, then we can refer you to our sister agencies.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned the challenges of funding to get infrastructure in the ag part. What are ways that we could, as citizens, to help the Department of Ag with this?
Well, we I think that elected officials are very mindful of their constituents. So, if you are have a representative or a senator that is, on like a ag committee or on a finance or ways and means committee, and if you're watching what's happening at the legislature regarding any kind of bills that come up for ag parks for the department, or funding for programs that will help the department's budget for services that you feel you would be highly beneficial to you, then I would ask you to submit your testimony or even call them and say you support this specific bill or not, because I really believe that the public voice, the constituent has the elected official wants to hear from the people that they represent in their district, what their priorities and needs are.
Thank you. That's something concrete that the citizens can actually do then.
Right. And a lot of our farmers do belong to commodity associations or, farming organizations, and even staying in touch with if you're a member, staying in touch with that organization, they do watch legislation during the session, and the organization itself oftentimes will submit testimony. So I would say that if you are a member of some kind of farming organization or ag-related organization, keep in touch with them and see what they're doing on government policy, and then also let them know that, well, if these specific topics are a great concern to you, to keep you in the loop, because I do see when we go through the legislative session that there are farmers going online, and you don't have to write a novel in your testimony, but you can go online and quickly check on a bill and click yes, you support, or you oppose, or you want to comment, and it doesn't take a lot of your time to do that.
So we have reflected on some of the stressors of our ag producers. I'm going to ask you about what are the stressors of Hawaii Department of Ag and having to navigate and balance all these different challenges and demands and needs.
It's kind of interesting because the department stressors are very similar to the producers that in the industry that we represent. So for us, our big challenge is labor. Just like it's very difficult to get adequate farm workers, we also are challenged to get people that want to apply and work in our positions. And so, getting the right qualified people, for the compensation that the state offers is a challenge. Also, just like farming, where you may be marginal profits because it's volume driven. You have to have the production because your margin is very small per unit, and that people that do own land, the cliche of land-rich, cash-poor. Well, for our department, we don't get very much as far as a piece of the state budget, overall budget. We get less than we were getting before the pandemic, 0.4% of the state budget. This next fiscal year, we've seen an increase in our budget and our resources, but we're still under 1%. So just like with the farming industry, getting adequate cash flow or resources to make improvements in your business, the department has lots of priorities that it wants to fill or attain, and we're restricted with the amount of resources that we have. We're challenged with a lot of expectations, just like farmers are, to run their business, and we're asked to do a lot more than the resources of the manpower that we have. So we try the best we can with what we have, and I think that just like farmers, the department tries to be as resilient as possible, because I do believe that we have many employees here that really care about ag, care about food, care about growing things for not only consumption, but also, with our horticulture and nursery industry, just producing things that make people feel good and, contribute to, their mental health. We have employees that really do more than 100%, because they believe in what you folks do for the general public. So, we have a lot of similarities, I believe.
Thank you. So reflecting on that about your state budget, currently right now is under 1%. Why is that, given that we're supposed to be moving toward food security and sustainability? Why do you think, even though you've had an increase in this year, that we're not seeing as much as perhaps it needs to be for us to become more sustainable and food secure?
Because within state government, there's a lot of competing needs, right? So there's a very strong advocacy for public health. There's a strong advocacy for public education. And our state is maybe the only state, maybe one of two, where the public education system is not county driven. So we have a statewide public education system. So, we have to compete with the health and welfare of the public and the education, and then also transportation issues like that. So, and the environment. So, there's competition for what the priorities are, and that's why we don't make the final decision. We put in what we believe we need to do for each biennium budget cycle, and hopefully we can get the majority of our asks so we can continue to support the industry. We have, I believe, in the last 4 years to 8 years under the current administration, really tried to work really closely with cooperative extension, because we've tried to coordinate resources to the best of our ability to get as much support between both agencies to assist our farmers. And luckily, during the pandemic, the federal government has kicked in with community support, agriculture, funding, and in recovery. So, we're really, really need to work together to spread those and stretch those dollars and services.
Hmm. So that requires a lot of resiliency and being.
Yes, and yes, and I think that people that decide to pick agriculture as their, for their career, whether it's in production, distribution, or even in government, I think you have to remain optimistic, and that's part of the resiliency. And I think that what keeps us all going is that we feel that what we're doing provides a really important service to our fellow man, to humanity, whether it's feeding food, feeding people, providing shelter. I think that that's why we're all in it. We're all in it because we believe that what we're going to do with our business or in our roles in government or affiliated services, we're really doing it because we want to feed people, we want to care for people. So I think as long as we keep our eye on that mission, and that mission is very important to us, that's what keeps us going.
So how then is this issue of mental well-being, mental health among ag producers? Are you hearing this as across the different states, at the federal level? How important is this issue?
I think that it's something that has never been brought up here in Hawaii. It's well known across the mainland United States that there's issues with depression, stress, and then even suicide. And so before the pandemic started, I think in 2019, I was at a meeting and with other fellow directors from other states' departments of ag. And the state of Colorado was very concerned about the well-being of their farming industry. So we all started talking, and then the Western states started saying, well, as a region in the United States, let's bring this up. And there were other, parts of the country and other states that were concerned about the well-being of their farmers. And so then the pandemic hit, and that it really added additional stress. So that's why our national organization decided to approach USDA and say, hey, would you be willing to fund a program to assist our farmers dealing with stress, and also provide some kind of assistance for their mental health? And that's why USDA opened up this opportunity for states to apply. And I talked to our team here at the department and said, hey, we should apply, because coming from a farming family, I firsthand experienced the stress of making payroll if you have employees, paying your bills, paying your taxes. I mean, that's just something that you deal with 24/7, along with market disruption, along with bad weather, hurricane, storm, floods, and all these things. So personally, I mean, I had a really, I think, realistic understanding of what it is to farm. And so we applied, and we're really pleased that we got the grant. So, at least we could start doing something, because I don't think Hawaii ever really talked about mental health and stress for our farmers. I mean, yeah, they always had something with Human Services or Department of Health for the general public, and maybe rural communities. But I think this was great because, if our farmers needed some kind of support, this was something that I think the timing was right because the opportunity was there and USDA was open to allocating funds.
Yeah, and we were grateful for that too. But as usually when you identify something, folks are going to say, well, then what are you going to do about it? Right now that you've identified all these stressors, are we going to continue to make sure that we provide the resources and support to mitigate these stressors? So there might be discussion and wondering, so what's next?
Yeah, so I think, I'll be attending Western Region Conference that next month. Well, actually, next month is tomorrow, but in July. And then again, a national conference in September. And, we do state reports. So I will include in Hawaii State Report, some of the findings, highlight the findings from, what we've learned from the grant so far. And then, ask USDA, because USDA does have representatives at our State Department of Agriculture, association meetings, to see, if the federal government continue to supplement what it started, and that way, maybe we can have support services expanded based on the baseline information. And I'm very pleased that people have been participating in the surveys and actually, reaching out, which is really good, because I know in the beginning we didn't know how open farmers and producers would be about sharing their feelings, because culturally here you really don't want to say how miserable you're feeling, because you do not want to project failure. And so I'm pleased that with Dr. Lee here, that the response has been better than what we were hoping for. So thank you very much for those of you who have participated so far.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap it up, but before we do, I'm going to ask you to reflect on what is your future perspective around ag in Hawaii?
Well, that's a really big question. And so I can just give you my opinion on it based on my experience both in the private sector and with the state the past 7.5 years. Because most of our farmers are farming anywhere generally between 2 acres and maybe less than 40 acres of land. I mean, there's a sweet spot where a lot of our farmers are in that 5-acre to 10-acre scale. And because it's small, the cost of production, is high. And so, the past 3 years or so, our department has been really having some really deep discussions with the leadership at CTAHR. And, I'm really sad that Dean Nick Comerford's last day is today and he's retiring, but I'm hoping that the work between our department and the college will continue. But, we're trying to see how we can give our industry the tools to increase productivity on the small scale of land that you either lease or you own, and what appropriate tools with innovation or technology that you can use to control your environment that's not highly expensive, very costly, whether it's some kind of covered, controlled environment agriculture that's affordable. That way you can produce more with less inputs. And so I think, as a department, we're we're trying to find proof and concept type of information, working with the college to see what kind of better information we can provide to our producers. So there's been a lot of talk about high tunnel production, shade houses, those type of things that are less expensive than totally controlled environment production, and minimize the use of pesticides, improve your management, and less labor. And we're hoping that by doing so, it can become more efficient and more productive and higher return on your investment. But, hopefully the state will continue its priority on trying to promote and support buying local, whether it's through our marketing and promotion activities, or you and I were talking about things like the Double Bucks program, where during COVID, we were actually able to expand what Double Bucks could be used for. So it started off with produce, right? Mm-hmm. Local produce. And then we were able to include proteins, local proteins. So eggs and beef and fish. And so, if government could continue supporting local production through a program like Double Bucks, and improving their procurement requirements to make it easier to buy from local food hubs or directly from producers, then maybe we can, as a state, can help increase revenue generation and sales for our farmers. And if you're making more money and able to pay your bills and make a profit, then hopefully that will make your life better and more manageable, and reduce the stresses that we all experience with agriculture.
So Phyllis,
yes.
Last question I'm going to have, and it's going to be a personal one. So in your 7.5 years of being chair, what has been the most meaningful experience for you in your role?
I think the most meaningful experience that I had was, and it was during COVID, during the pandemic, the department always had special funds. We got a portion of every gallon of, barrel of oil for us to use for agricultural development and food production. And so, we had those funds, and I think that the best thing that I experienced was when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and all through 2020, we were able to use, I would say, $600,000 of our special funds to actually give out small grants of $2,000, $4,000, $10,000 directly to producers, using exemptions, emergency exemptions from procurement requirements, and just to get cash into the hands of our farmers so that they would have a bridge of revenue to stay in business while the federal government's CARES Act money is kicked in. So, whether it was for just to replace income that was lost because, the restaurants and the hotels shut down at one time, farmers markets were closed, and then, with climate change, with the drought and situation like that. So I think that was probably the best experience that I had, that we were able to act quickly in a matter of less than 60 days to get cash out to over 200 farmers. I wish we could have done more, but we were able also to assist with getting $500,000 of CARES Act money also to double bucks. So, that multiplied to $2 million with the philanthropic match from private investors and then also with the government. So, I mean, it was a really challenging experience, but then I think that it was really rewarding for me that we had the ability to help quickly. And it went to a good cause because we were very concerned that we didn't want to lose our industry because of the pandemic, but being there to keep you afloat for a short period of time so you could get federal assistance, that was very rewarding.
Well, thank you so much, Phyllis, for participating and sharing your mana'o and all your experiences and insight with us.
Well, thanks so much. And I can't thank you and your staff and also our stakeholders that have really, taken the advantage and the opportunity to participate in Seeds of Wellness, because I hope that it brings you some comfort, some relief to help you get back on track and continue to have a good life, because you do good work for the public. So
Mahalo.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay.
you. We want to thank our guests for their generosity and mana'o. We also want to thank all our ag producers throughout the islands, and especially those we have heard on the podcast for discussing ways they address the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of Hawaii ag production. Each story, each voice contributes to a broader understanding of what it takes to survive and thrive as we feed our communities. Wherever you may find yourself within our island agriculture economies, if you would like to share your story in our podcast, please contact us. Thank you for listening to the Seeds of Wellbeing, Voices from the Field podcast featuring their perspectives of ag producers throughout the Hawaii Islands. If you have found it helpful, please follow, like, and share this episode with others. And if you have any ideas about how we can make it better, please let us know in the comments or use the link on our website. Mahalo for tuning in. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this Seeds of Wellbeing series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the University of Hawaii, College of Tropical Agriculture, and Human Resources, and any affiliated organization involved in this project.